So a while back, I went to Istanbul in Turkey. It's the first real holiday I've ever been on, and it always felt like it was going to happen eventually. As a fanatic of Ottoman history, I found myself drawn to the city of Constantinople, knowing so many relics, buildings, graves, and historical sites I'd pored over for years in books, for them to be right there to see in the flesh. And much of what I wanted to see was within reasonable distance of each other. So I took the plunge, taking some of my family with me, and it was an incredible experience, completely fulfilling as a cherisher of Ottoman history and then some. And if you're interested, I'd like to share some of the details of my journey with you. Once you're done with this video, you might discover fascinating elements of the old city, the culture, the history. I would definitely recommend the trip. The only downside for us was that when we went in the summer of 2024, the inflation rate was rising, and though much of what we did was free or cheap, I found the food to be very expensive, even in the more non-touristy areas. But that was pretty much the only downside. Word of warning, I did not take photos and videos with the intention of posting them online. Plus, I've not included many clips of our journey that contains my family for the sake of privacy. I took some great shots, but my family are in most of the clips, and I've removed music due to copyright. So all in all, this is probably going to be the worst travel log you'll ever see. I had several places on my list of where I wanted to go, mainly some mosques, mausoleums, and a palace. All historical sites. I took a few snapshots of map routes, did a ton of research, and aside from the Wi-Fi at the hotel, we had no internet when we were out and about. But the GPS on the phone still works without it, and to be honest, things were more fun that way. Some of my favourite experiences was discovering new things, maybe finding an old mosque on the way to where we were going. And Istanbul is a city that caters to your inquisitive quenches, as there are many signposts and plaques that detail the significance of whatever it is you're looking at. It's truly a goldmine for history buffs. We stayed on the European side in the Sultan Ahmed district of Fatih, which although is the peak tourist area, was close to many of the places I wanted to go to. This is inside of our hotel room. We stayed in a great place called Angel's Home Hotel, a 5-minute walk from the Sultan Ahmed Park. This is the kitchen area where breakfast is served in the morning, and this is the view from the roof where you get a serene look at the sea, the magnificent Sultan Ahmed Mosque, and the ancient Hagia Sophia, or Hagia Sophia as the Turks pronounce it. A taxi from the airport was part of our package, and we got to the city around 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and we were there for a week. I did not want to waste time, and after we checked in and had a small bite to eat at an expensive restaurant next door, we started. This was when Istanbul, being known as the city of cats, became immediately apparent. There were cats everywhere, dogs too, and they were so chill, so at ease with people wandering in and amongst the pedestrians. It was so easy to pick them up and just play with them. This is the Sultan Ahmed Park, which sits in the middle of two of Istanbul's most beautiful buildings, the Sultan Ahmed Mosque and the Hagia Sophia. They stand proudly alongside each other, examples of the city's fascinating grandeur. If I can remember correctly, we tried to go to the Hagia Sophia first, but the security man wouldn't let me in, so we went to the Sultan Ahmed Mosque first. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque is also known as the Blue Mosque in the West, and one of the first things you notice is that it isn't really blue. That's because the blue used to refer to the interior design, the Iznik tiles and whatnot. Apparently this is where the word turquoise comes from, literally French for Turk, as French travellers went back home after being mesmerised by the interior of the Blue Mosque. The sense of scale, grandeur, beauty and might is not something that the phone camera can capture. You really have to be here to feel it. Sultan Ahmed was the most touristy mosque of the ones we visited. Loads of people were inside talking and picture snapping, though the system they have here to accommodate all the visitors is pretty good. A section at the back for visitors with a barrier you're asked not to cross unless you're going to pray, for which you go to the front, and the mosque is so big that you end up not being disturbed at the front. Though today it's practically the poster boy of Istanbul, with a lot of people not venturing out of the Sultan Ahmed area and visiting other mosques, the initial construction of the masjid was actually quite controversial. The inside is simply stunning, beyond my articulation abilities. Obviously it won't be the original design from the 1600s, but it's amazing. Only one other mosque we visited could challenge the interior of the Blue Mosque. Commissioned by Sultan Ahmed I, a sultan notable for breaking the Ottoman tradition of fratricide, Sultan Ahmed also broke other traditions. You see, when Ottoman sultans gained victory on the battlefield and gained territory from their enemies, they would often celebrate by building a mosque, which would be also accompanied by a kulye system, which was essentially a neighborhood to accompany the mosque, a market, a school, a caravanserai where travelers could stay and eat for free for 3 days, a library, things like that. But during Sultan Ahmed's time, the Ottomans were losing battles, not winning them. But the young pious sultan was determined to build a mosque, so made it using money from the Ottoman's treasury. In addition to this, the mosque was made with 6 minarets, and only the Prophet Muhammad's mosque in Mecca had this many. In order to mitigate this controversy, Sultan Ahmed had a 7th minaret built in the Prophet's mosque. So much fascinating history in this city, far too much to cover in a single video. There is so much space in between you and the domes that it's difficult to gauge how big this mosque is from the inside, but it's simply breathtaking. Just look at the size of that pillar. The architectural ingenuity to create such things is beyond me. I can only stare and take it all in. This is the front of the mosque where the main praying area is, where we can get a close-up look of these stained glass looking effects. One thing I noticed was that the Ottoman mosques did a lot with natural lighting. They were built in a way that could allow for a lot of light to come in, and when it got dark they would turn the interior lights on. So it was always cool to visit mosques both in the daytime and the nighttime, as we did on a few occasions. There was a beautiful little model of the Prophet's mosque here too. As mentioned, these information pole things were all over the city. You can pause the video and read it to learn more about the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. In front of the mosque is what used to be a hippodrome, a colosseum of sorts, where chariots and entertainment would take place in the Roman times. But it declined into ruin over time, and when the Ottomans took over the city, they had no use for it, though didn't build over it. All that is left are these ancient monuments, such as the obelisk of Theodosius, the serpent column, and the walled obelisk. We also came across a Palestinian procession condemning the war crimes and the genocide being committed against Gaza. It was one of the many signs that the oppression the Gazans were facing was not forgotten by the people of the world, even if they themselves couldn't do much about it. Next was the Hagia Sophia, originally a church built by Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, the epitome of Byzantine architecture. The Hagia Sophia was said to be neglected in the final days of the Byzantine Empire, as the city was suffering after being sacked during the Fourth Crusade by the Catholics. Sultan Mehmed Fatih, or Muhammad the Conqueror, in his early 20s, during the year 1453, fulfilled the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad by doing something that many had tried to do before him, taking the city of Constantinople. He is said to have been mesmerized by the Hagia Sophia, immediately turning it into a mosque, but as you'll see, much of the original Christian designs remain untouched. Al-Fatih would turn Constantinople into a cosmopolitan megacity, and it began with the renovation of the Hagia Sophia. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed and was formally abolished by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in the 1920s, the Hagia Sophia was turned into a museum, but in the past few years was converted back into a mosque under President Erdogan. This little box you see here is where the Sultan would pray his Friday prayers, hidden to increase the sense of allure and to protect him from assassins. The name of God in Arabic, Allah, is written on this huge disc made in the 1800s. The name of Muhammad is on the one next to it, and you also have the name of the Prophet's 2 grandsons, Hassan and Hussein, and the 4 close companions of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali. This is probably what the flooring looks like under the carpet, and this particular spot is where certain ceremonies happened. The Hagia Sophia has a mysterious quality to it, an awe, a dignity that is intrinsically linked to the sense of history. The times that the Hagia Sophia has seen, the many great men who walked through its doors. When you're inside, you feel appreciative that you're able to experience this, to have your name added to those who have walked under this dome. Even with all the people around, you feel like tiptoeing around the place as to not disturb the area. It was a very spiritual experience, broken only by a chaotic half hour where I lost my wife. I was beginning to panic because I knew it was in her nature to panic, but when I found her, she was chilling without a care in the world. The Islamic proclamation of faith, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah. By the time we left, it was now nighttime, and the Sultanahmet Park, the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia looked terrific against the dead of night. And we weren't done yet because we went to the Sultan Ahmed Mosque again. Seeing it lit up was a completely different experience. We looked around again, we prayed, but then we just sat there, exhausted but feeling full of energy given to us by the splendor we were taking in. On the way back to the hotel now, and that's when I noticed that the call to prayer, the adhan, was interchanged between the two mosques. Well, not interchanged, but one would do one line and then wait for the other to do theirs, and then he would do his and back and forward like that. This was absolutely brilliant, a great system that gave the calls to prayer synergy. I've been to places where they've had multiple mosques close together and they all do it at similar times and you can't differentiate, but this was a terrific system. Walked past a little show with a whirling dervish too. Not bad for a first day, don't you think? A third of a day really, seeing as though we arrived in the afternoon. This is the view from our roof at night. The next morning we had breakfast, but we were stuck in our room because my son got a stomach bug because he kept putting his finger in his mouth. I was out of luck looking for a pharmacy as they were closed on Sundays, but on my way back I came across the grave of Sultan Ahmed, his son Sultan Murad IV, a very interesting sultan in his own right, and much of Ahmed I's family. All these graves, children's graves as well, was quite a sight. One of the women who worked at the hotel, in a gracious gesture atypical of the Turkish people we encountered, who were wonderful people, made my kid a herbal remedy and it made him a lot better, so we set off in the afternoon. The basilica cistern was closed, so we went there. This is the largest underground cistern in Istanbul. It used to be full of water and the surviving parts have about 300 pillars. This used to be a water supply for the city, but it is now an attraction. But when you factor in the queue, the heat, lumping around the pushchair up and down the stairs, and the surprisingly small size, I would probably skip this if I came to the city again. It's a one-time thing, I think. They filmed a sequence from the James Bond film From Russia with Love here. The heads of Medusa were interesting, probably taken by the Byzantines from Greece. Nobody really knows why one is upside down and the other is sideways. Perhaps the Christians did it as they did not have respect for the pagan religions, or maybe they just didn't know the significance, and to the builders, a slab is a slab. Who knows? But it's interesting stuff. We had some snacks after this in the Sultanahmet Park, where we got a history lesson by this elderly man who was chilling under a tree. It's actually amazing how much information can be exchanged when you know just a few words. I hardly understood what he was saying, but the points he made pretty much came across. My mission today was to go to the grave of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the Suleymaniye Mosque, and a few other mosques that were close to the Suleymaniye Mosque. It would end up being quite the adventure. We took the tram to the Bayezid area, where we saw this thing here, and the Bayezid Mosque, the mosque of Mehmed the Conqueror's son, Sultan Bayezid II. One of the beauties of having a general goal but being willing to explore is that you come across finds and gems, and one of them was the Nuri Osmani Mosque, an 18th century mosque that we stumbled across, which is one of my favourites of the city. The first Istanbul mosque to be made in the Baroque style. It almost looks like a church. There's something quite grand about it, a feeling of marvel. A combination of stained glass windows you associate with Western churches and the dome and calligraphy you associate with Islamic art, and the result is one of the city's most underrated mosques. A combination of East and West. The air was flowing freely through the doors and windows, creating a refreshing breeze. And for the first time we were in a mosque that was free from noisy tourists. The hardest thing for us was tearing ourselves away from it, knowing we had other places we wanted to go to. So, still looking for the grave of Abdul Hamid II, which I knew was in the mausoleum of Mahmud II, we thought the graveyard might be part of this mosque, Mahmud Pasha, built in the era of Mehmed II. This was a really neat little mosque. The clean, bright red carpet contrasted nicely with the white walls. It was smaller than the previous mosques we'd been to, but it had a really cool double dome, both decorated differently. It was nice just lying there, staring up at them. I felt at peace. Cats everywhere, as mentioned. There's like 5 here, sleeping in the shade. Eventually I found the mausoleum, where the 3 most significant graves are Sultan Mahmud II, his son Sultan Abdul Aziz, and Abdul Aziz's nephew Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Each has their own story, interesting in their own right. Mahmud II, for example, the man who hunted down and ended the Janissaries, and who initiated the Tanzimat reforms. Abdul Aziz was deposed and allegedly killed himself by slicing his wrist, but it's largely thought that he was murdered and his death was staged. Abdul Hamid II is the one I had the most affinity for, being considered the last true leader of the Islamic world, the last caliph, the last Muslim ruler of an Islamic empire who had actual autonomy. Technically there were about 2 sultans after him, but they were more or less puppet heads, whereas Abdul Hamid had actual power and used it to protect his dominion before he was overthrown by the Young Turks. And essentially he delayed all the chaos we see in the Muslim world today, such as his refusal to sell parts of Palestine to Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, saying that he'd rather fall on his sword than give up an inch of the land his people paid for with their blood. His story is an amazing but bittersweet one, and his grave is on the far left, with Abdul Aziz next to him and Mahmud II on the right. I'm pretty sure those are actually their hats. It's not out of the question that they would have preserved them, as they didn't die that long ago. Plus, if you look at photos and images, the hats fit their respective head shapes. As you can see, their name tags also contain their respective tughras, which were the unique signatures of every sultan. This was lunch, expensive as mentioned, but very nice. We eat quite a bit of food, so the Adana kebab was kind of small, but very nice, as was this pasta thing. In Turkey, the ice cream sellers often play games with customers and mess about with them, as you can see with the old man here. I got one to do it to my son as well later on, which was a great laugh. Look what he's doing to him. Look what he's doing to him. He's tricking him. This is the entrance to the Grand Bazaar, which was closed at the time, but we went a few days later, containing 4,000 shops. The bazaar started being made during the time of Mehmed the Conqueror and contains a maze of loads of different shops, as you'll see later. Then came the Mosque of Suleiman the Magnificent, arguably the best mosque in Istanbul. Known as the Magnificent by his enemies and Qanuni, or the lawgiver, by his subjects, for streamlining the law, making it more Islamic and merciful compared to his predecessor. He was the great-grandson of Mehmed the Conqueror and ruled longer than any other Ottoman Sultan at 46 years. Here is his grave, surrounded by his family. Many consider him to be the greatest Ottoman Sultan, and his reign is considered the peak of Ottoman civilization, in particular the peak of its cultural development. Mimar Sinan, for example, the greatest architect of Ottoman history, got much of his patronage from Sultan Suleiman. Some of his major battles included the Battle of Mohacs, and he was also known for controversially marrying his favourite consort, Roxolana, who in turn exerted much influence over palace politics, which comes with its own story. I need to restrain myself when talking about the lives of the sultans and Ottoman history in general, otherwise we'll be here all day. There's just so much interesting history, so much to talk about, which we can't fit in here. Check out my cinematography skills here. Can't really see the mosque, can't really see it. Oh, there it is. Bask in its magnificence. The mosque is a stunning piece of architecture. Honestly, your brain can't even comprehend or process how big it is, how far away the dome is when you're inside or just standing out of it. People at the time would have never even got the experience of seeing it in all its glory, because the images you see online, of course, they can only be gotten by plane or drone or something. At ground level, it's simply too big to take it all in. They had free literature for you to take away as well, as you can see. It's worth saying a few words about the architect Sinan. I kept seeing his name come up when doing research on Ottoman buildings, and he's a very interesting character in his own right, having a military career as a Janissary commander before becoming an architect. In short, he was the grand architect of the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent, Selim II and Murad III. Almost every mosque you see in Istanbul is based on his designs. He did structural work on the Hagia Sophia, after which it was never majorly affected by earthquakes. He did works on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. He's built bridges and dams all over Europe, which still exist today. But he's most famous for his mosques, in particular three. The Shehzade Mosque, built on the orders of Suleiman the Magnificent after his son died to commemorate him. A mosque that would be considered a masterpiece by any other architect, but one that Mimar Sinan considered an apprenticeship work. The next best is usually considered to be the Suleymaniye Mosque, also his most famous work, completed when he was about 70 and considered the best of what he called his qualification stage. And his masterpiece, finished in his 80s, is the Selimiye Mosque. Not the one in Istanbul though, the one in Erdin, which we never saw as it was very far away, 2.5 hours drive or something. He had many maverick ideas, like using ostrich eggs in the mosques to keep insects away. It was on my list, but we almost missed the grave of Mimar Sinan, which we caught as we left. There was no way to go all the way inside, but this is his tomb here, designed by the man himself, who went for a more simple design compared to the more grand tombs he designed for others. The water supply is free for anyone to use, the idea being that the religious reward will go back all the way to Sinan, even after his passing. We then began travelling to the Shehzade Mosque, which was a little walk away, and we came across this mosque and tomb, which contained the grave of a spiritual leader who refused to see Mehmed the Conqueror, in an interesting story laid out here. I'm guessing Suleymaniye's son is buried here, but we never ended up going. I just kind of forgot. The mosque itself was amazing. It was like a smaller version of the Suleymaniye Mosque, but because it was smaller, you could comprehend what you were seeing more and appreciate what you were seeing. I actually like this more than the Suleymaniye Mosque. Yeah. One second. And there were loads of cats here, dogs too. My son had a great time playing with the cats until he got chased by one across the mosque. This is the cheeky culprit here. It's just amazing. What more can you say? My 5-year-old acting as the cameraman here.
Which button?
So it was sundown now, and believe it or not, our next destination was the Suleymaniye Mosque again, because my wife was insistent on seeing it during the night. So here we are again, the Suleymaniye Mosque at night. This was our evening dinner from a restaurant right next to the mosque. You can't really tell from my camera, but Istanbul looks really great at night, the lights and everything. And the mosque really comes into its own as an imperial structure at night, built on one of the 7 hills of Istanbul and visible from most of the city. And that there was actually one of our next destinations, more on that in a bit. So it was night now, and we had 2 more mosques on my list for the day, in what had been an exhausting but fulfilling day. It was fun trying to find the Rustem Pasha Mosque, considered a hidden gem, but one where you have to go through loads of back alleys. I never felt unsafe once in the city, it's worth mentioning. We could see it, but we couldn't get into it until we found an entrance squeezed between 2 shops. You have to go up a flight of ancient looking stairs with a really low ceiling before you get to here. Known for its gorgeous Iznik tiles, the mosque is best visited during the day, as you can probably tell. But it still looked fantastic even in the low light. There was practically nobody here except the imam and the security man. I remember them looking over at me a few times before they prayed expectantly, and I felt bad that I couldn't join them because I hadn't done ablutions and there was nowhere to do it here, and it was just them 2 praying by themselves. We stopped by and bought some lovely baklava before going to the Yani Chami, or the new mosque, something I initially had dismissed because of the name, thinking it was a newer building and therefore without historical significance. But I was wrong, because it's actually about 500 years old. And that aside, both inside and out, it is stunning. It's right up there with the very best mosques in Istanbul, a must-see on your list. It's beautiful to look at. Stands proud a couple of 100 yards away from the Suleyman Mosque, and the interior is simply mesmerizing. The mosque was closing as the security guards started turning the lights off and telling people to leave, hence my hasty poor images, but we returned several times throughout the trip, as I'll show you. It was definitely a favourite of ours. There's people who I know who've been to Istanbul, who've been for weeks, several times, who haven't covered what we covered in 1.5 days. So we were definitely getting our money's worth, and that marked the end of our first full day. This was our lunch on Monday. I had this tomato sauce meat thing, and my wife had a wrap. Here's a shot of the Shehzade Mosque again as we went looking for the Fatih Mosque. It's often better to walk in Istanbul than take the tram or taxi because you come across so many things, like this memorial for people who lost their lives in the famous coup attempt that occurred in 2016. So this is the Fatih Mosque, named after Muhammad al-Fatih, the conqueror of Constantinople, and my personal favourite of the sultans. This is his grave. There is an aura of respect and dignity commanded by it, and the tomb is beautifully maintained. This is where the Sultan's wife is buried. The mosque itself is really nice, a nice open space, wonderful window work which was complemented by the natural lighting and a baroque feel about it. But it's important to note it is not the original design. I was thinking as I was looking at it that it looked inspired by the works of Mimar Sinan, but Sinan came along later, so what gives? But there was an information plaque that said the original mosque was damaged and has not survived. So what we see today was basically built in the late 18th century. So it's still old, I guess. It still has that historical significance that I craved during my trip. Next was a trip to the Selimiye Mosque, the Mosque of Selim the Resolute or Selim the Grim. He was the grandson of Al-Fatih, a man who only ruled for 8 years or so, but in that time tripled the size of the empire, and he was the first to control the two holy cities of Makkah and Medina, effectively becoming the first Ottoman caliph. This is his tomb. His story and life is fascinating, and along with Mehmed II and Suleiman the Magnificent, completes the trio who most consider the best 3 Ottoman sultans. Again, I'm pretty sure this is not the original mosque design. The grave of Sultan Abdul Majid is here also, the father of Abdul Hamid II. You couldn't get in, but you can see it from the window. Each mosque in Istanbul had its own atmosphere and feel. With Yavuz Sultan Selim Khan or Selim the Resolute, the culture in the mosque was reflective of his title. The men looked deeply religious, many kitted out in full religious garments, thobes and such, and the women were wearing burqas and there was complete segregation. We were very far from the tourist area now, and it was really cool how every area of the city had its own feel. There was some kind of function or program that was going on to start here, which I think accounts for the amount of people that were there. Then it was a long walk downwards to the beautiful Bosporus, where we hitched a tram to make our way to Eyyup Sultan. This was the best area we went to in the whole of Istanbul. There's a fountain here, there's loads of shops, there's people giving out free food with no catch. The place was full of families, children, couples. It had a beautiful atmosphere, serene and wholesome. There was a couple on a bike that ended up slipping and crashing, and loads of people surrounded them asking them if they were okay, picking up the bike, all that kind of stuff. In the cool evening breeze, surrounded by families, tired and exhausted, there was no better place than to spend the evening. We would go there twice in total. That's in spite of me not really being a person who wants to do things again. I'd rather push on and gain new experiences, but we knew we just had to come back eventually. Eyyup Sultan is built around the mosque and grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, a close friend of the Prophet Muhammad, who fought in every battle he had fought in with him. After the Prophet's passing, a group of his companions tried to take Constantinople, which included an aged Abu Ayyub, who is said to have died on the outskirts of Constantinople. When the city was taken hundreds of years later, the tomb was built in his memory. The mosque is lovely as well. This kid here gave my son some money while I was busy praying, a reminder of the Turkish people's generosity and welcoming nature. The tram stop between Eyyup Sultan and Sultan Ahmed where we stayed is the waterfront port Eminonu, which is where the new mosque is, and it has a nice bustling atmosphere with restaurants, some even on the boats themselves. The next morning, we planned to go to the Asian side of Istanbul. This is the Bosporus Sea. Oh, where you see that massive bridge over there, that's the Asian side of Istanbul. So you can take a boat This is the only city in the world that covers 2 continents. We're in Europe. If we went over there, we'd be in Asia. This here is the Golden Horn. This is where the Christians had the massive chain cross, and the Muslims could not bring their boats here because the chain would break the boats, or they'd let the boats come in, they'd put the chain up, then the Muslims would be stuck in this river. They built a bridge over here now, so you can't really see the whole thing unless you go to the other side. But that over there is where Fatih took the ships and carried them over and then dumped them on this side. After a quick trip to the Hagia Sophia, we dined at a restaurant on the Galata Bridge, which connects the South Europe side to the North Europe side. This is the stuff we ate. It wasn't great, to be honest. Touristy food and touristy prices. Fishy food and very fishy prices. Food was the one thing I didn't really research, and the one thing I came to notice was that everywhere where they gave the baklava for free, or the tea for free, it was probably because they could afford to, because they were ripping you off with the dinner. The boat trip across the continents was nice, great fun for the kids and lots of sights to see. We visited the Eyyup Sultan Mosque, built by Sinan and commissioned by the daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, and you had the dual azan thing going on here too. It's worth mentioning, I wasn't feeling great on this day. I think the intense past 2 days took its toll and my body shut down, so we probably didn't cover as much as we wanted to on the Asian side, like trying to find the Kamlika Mosque, the biggest mosque in Turkey. I just wasn't feeling up to it, and my heart probably was not in it because it was a modern mosque anyway, so we mainly walked up and down the Bosporus. The water was great, and we even saw a dolphin, which was amazing. It was scary, in fact, because it makes you wonder what else is in the water. In Byzantine times, there was actually a giant whale, Porphyrios, which terrorized fishermen for 50 years before it was beached and killed. This is Maiden's Tower. There is a fable that a king received a prophecy that his daughter would die from a snake bite, so he built this tower in the middle of nowhere and made her live there to protect her. But one day, the person who arrived every day to bring food unknowingly had a snake hidden in the food basket, which ended up killing her. Who knows if it's true, but it's a cool story. It was after this that I tried to find a way to the Kamlika Mosque, but with me not really feeling up to it and not understanding the bus system, unlike the really easy tram system, we just gave up and had dinner in a local place. As I said, I don't think my heart was really in it anyway, and I pretty much tackled almost everything I wanted to see. We then called it a day, and I intentionally stayed long enough on the Asian side so we could have the boat trip experience at night. And since the boat stops at Eminonu, we visited the new mosque again, this time with time to savour the incredible interior. It's definitely one of the standout mosques. After breakfast the next morning, it was time to see the one major thing that was still left on my list, the Topkapi Palace, the seat of the Ottoman Empire, the royal residence, from the time of Sultan Mehmed Fatih until Sultan Abdul Majid, who moved the seat to the Dolmabahce Palace. Around 30 sultans ruled from here for about 400 years, many of them adding their own additions to the palace. It's very big, strategically built so that it will be extremely difficult for an enemy to get to the sultan. But there is something quite simple and humble about it. Lots of greenery, courtyards, and very rarely over 1 or 2 stories high. I would recommend working your entire day around a Topkapi Palace visit, taking some snacks and lots of water, because it's huge. Lots of walking, lots to see, and you'll be there for a few hours, so get there early. It costs about 30 quid, but it's definitely worth it. To be honest though, it might be an OCD thing, but I tend to get very stressed in museums and such. It's that whole thing about needing to see every corner, every inch, but at the same time you want to go quickly enough to catch everything so you don't miss it and get kicked out when they close it. It had a cool little gift shop where they had small replica swords of Sultan Mehmed Fatih, Suleiman the Magnificent, and Selim III. Had they had the sword of Selim the Grim, I would have gotten Fatihs, Selims, and Suleimans. I don't know how. I'd probably have to ring my family back home and ask for emergency money or something. But that wasn't an opportunity I'd want to see sail by. But as they didn't have Selims, I just bought Fatihs, which I still have, and it sits on my bookshelf. Though my missus initially disagreed, we started looking at the less important stuff first. Things like the kitchen area, utensils, pots and pans and stuff. My thinking, which she eventually agreed to, was that if we went big first, we wouldn't find all this stuff as interesting later on. I really liked this section, where they showed clothes that Ottoman sultans wore, next to portraits and pictures of them wearing them. I don't know if this is really the stuff or they are replicas, you just never really know, do you? But there is a lot of stuff well preserved, so I don't see why not. Many of them didn't die too long ago. There's a gorgeous view of the Golden Horn as you transition from this section. Imagine seeing this when you woke up every morning. It's interesting that I always hear from people who come here, vloggers and whatnot, that you aren't allowed to take pictures and videos of some of the stuff, especially the religious relics. I've seen videos where people were talking about how guards shouted at them when they pulled out their phones. I've got a friend who had to take sneaky shots while the security were looking the other way. We must have been incredibly lucky then, because nobody stopped us taking pictures, and we took a lot, in the Holy Relics section in particular. The next bit was one of my favourites, the armoury. Here there were swords, maces, battle axe, shields, armour, all sorts. Things that belonged to Fatih, to Selim, all sorts. It's fascinating to think that these were things worn and used by all these larger-than-life historical figures. Honestly, the stuff you see at the Topkapi Palace is too much to process. There's too many amazing things, and your brain can't handle it all in the short amount of time that you're there. Check out these emeralds and rubies. This is the famous Topkapi dagger, an emerald-studded dagger gifted by Sultan Mahmud I as a peace offering to the Shah of Iran, Nadir Shah. But on the way, the emissaries carrying it found out that Nadir Shah had been assassinated, so they returned to Istanbul and the dagger still sits here today. Here we can see elaborately decorated covers of the Quran, which led us to the next section where we saw all sorts of old Qurans, some with different scripts, like this one written in the Kufic script and also Islamic calligraphy. I seem to remember taking more photos than I have available here, but maybe I'm misremembering. But it is a lot more than this. I pretty much decided to live in the moment and only take a few photos here and there. Otherwise my OCD would force me to take a photo of everything and I wouldn't actually enjoy myself. The next section was where they kept holy relics, things that date back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad and even beyond to the time of Jesus and such. This area is so holy that they have someone recite the Quran here 24/7 apparently. Much of these artifacts have been verified. Experts have examined them and they've been carbon dated and analysed, such as this Quran, known as the Topkapi manuscript, one of the oldest Qurans in the world. Of course, not everything can be confirmed, especially the ancient artifacts, but much of it is thought to be real. Swords, Qurans, hairs, turbans, bows, many of which were the prophets and the companions of the Prophet. You can even trace it historically. For example, the Mamluks were the custodians of Makkah and Medina, where many of these relics would have been. And when Selim defeated them, he had the relics transported to Istanbul. So it makes sense that these things would be here, rather than somewhere else. But to be honest, given the magnitude and majesty of what we were witnessing, I don't quite feel comfortable just showing everything here in a YouTube video, where people watching might be, lying naked in bed or on the loo or who knows. So if you don't mind, I'd rather not share most of the photos from this section. I do think you can find images of the relics online though. They had this nice little slideshow playing of really old photos of religious and historical significance. It was back to seeing swords and weapons again, some really interesting and cool designs, like this sword here from Bayezid II, the son of Mehmed Fatih. Of course, not all of these swords were used in battle, some were of course ceremonial swords. Here's me posing with the sword of Mehmed Fatih with my replica of it that I bought. Although to be honest, I think later on I figured out that that's not actually the sword that my replica is of. He's got another one that was here and I'm basically posing next to the wrong one. There were these Hungarian swords that were absolutely huge. Surely the one in the middle was ceremonial. I can't see how a human being could legitimately carry that and fight in battle. This was a very interesting room. Here many important decisions were made by the viziers and pashas, and behind that grating is where the Sultan would sit and listen, interjecting if he needed to. It was a great policy of ensuring the viziers were always on point and staying sharp, because there was not always a guarantee that the Sultan was actually there. They would need to conduct business with the idea in mind that he was. The harem is one of the most popular areas, a private area where the Sultan's mother, wives, concubines, children and servants would live. No outsider, aside from the Sultan himself and the dedicated guards, were allowed in here. Many people imagine in their heads some European Orientalist notions of scantily clad women walking around, but the reality was far from this. There was a school here, apartments, a mosque, a library and various private courtyards. This is the Imperial Hall, a gorgeous domed hall which was the reception hall of the Sultan, where he received his family and confidants. There's a really nice view from this massive balcony, and below it is a large marble area which I later learned was a massive pool. There were all sorts of relaxing and therapeutic fountains and pools and some really cool thrones. I don't seem to have all of the photos that I took, but look at the unbelievable calligraphy on the dome of this room here. This is a room where the Sultan would rest and perform his prayers. This is where Sultans' bodies were washed after they died in preparation for their funeral. This was a throne built for the Sultans to watch entertainment. This is a section that was built by Sultan Abdul-Majid, who was one of the main sultans who westernized the Ottoman Empire, as you can see. And finally, we were gifted with an extraordinary view at the far end of the palace. There was still more to see, but my family was exhausted, and to be honest, we covered most of the main stuff anyway. We had a decent bite to eat at a restaurant very close to the exit of the palace, and check this Turkish sweet shop out. It looks amazing, doesn't it? And the people in these kind of shops are really nice. Obviously, part of it is a selling tactic, but they let you try loads of different foods. They give you tea, they engage your kids in conversation, and if you want to leave, they let you go in peace. It's a really nice atmosphere and they really do treat you well. We went for a walk in the Gulhane Park just off the palace. We did get told off by a guard who told us to get out of the water, but aside from that, it was a really relaxing walk. I also had to convince my missus, who eventually saw the fruits of my idea, that rather than walk through the city to get back to the hotel, why don't we walk across the Bosporus? She was scared initially, but it turned out to be one of the highlights of the trip. Just seeing the waves and the ships as the sun got lower and lower, people chilling and fishing. Check out this cat trying to steal the fish that some fella had caught. Again, it speaks to the nature of the people here. I was expecting him to shoo the cat away when he found out. Instead, he gave him some fish to eat. Me and my son went to the Sultan Ahmed Mosque again that night as he really wanted ice cream, leaving my wife and baby back in the hotel, and there were a few minutes of panic where I lost him in the mosque. But that aside, pretty much everything I wanted to accomplish in Istanbul was done, aside from the Grand Bazaar which we planned for the next day. My kid is in this image. I left him near the park to take some money out, but it gives you an idea of how safe we felt in the city even at night. We first visited the Mosque of Bayezid II, which was very close to the Bazaar, an atypically amazing mosque with a feline friend that was resting inside. Speaking of cats, we became a lot more comfortable and started picking them up off the streets and playing with them. It was great fun. I saw this beauty sleeping among the books in a bookshop. I saw something really interesting here, where a random passerby left a sausage or something for a cat and it tried to eat it but it was struggling. Another passerby, this guy, saw this, pulled out a knife and cut the meat into small pieces and then walked away. Very cool to see. Next, it was time for the Grand Bazaar, and as someone who generally hates shopping, I actually had a great time here. We were only there for about 20 minutes or so as we became hungry and got a falafel wrap, but I wished we'd spend more time here. It was just the vibe really, the cool atmosphere, getting lost in a maze of loads of varied shops, the odd bite to eat or drink offered for free by a vendor. You don't generally buy things from the Grand Bazaar, as the prices are usually jacked up, even when bargaining, but it is nice just to explore it. Next, we used the tram and the metro to get to the North European side, where we got to Taksim, a well-known tourist and leisure district. Again, it was just a really nice atmosphere. This area felt very modern, very classy, very sleek, best represented by the Taksim Mosque. It really does feel like what a modern version of an Ottoman mosque might be like. For example, it had a cafe inside and a library, in what is something of a modern update on the classic Kulye system. Here's our afternoon dessert in the mosque. After this, we just walked around the district, checking out a few shops here and there, a little park too where we rested, before we grabbed a bite to eat at one of the many takeaway shops. The next day it was time for Friday prayers, and this was the queue for the Hagia Sophia. It was absolutely packed inside and we only just about managed to make it in. But it was an honor to be able to have prayed Jummah at the Hagia Sophia. I noticed there were pigeons flying around inside the mosque. I mean, you never see any poop around, so clearly they do an amazing job of keeping these places clean. This here is a small little mosque next to the Hagia Sophia that we walked past loads of times, so it's only right that we took a peek inside. We planned to try and see Fatih, Selim and Suleiman again before we left, ending with a trip back to Eyyup Sultan. On the way, we had the most filling and satisfying meal out of everything we ate in Istanbul, and it was pretty reasonably charged too. The further away you are from the tourist areas, even if you walk just a few roads down, the prices are way better, though it is still not exactly cheap. We spotted a nice little mosque with an interesting history, but our trip was cut short because my kid was desperate to go to the loo and there were no decent ones near us, so we just thought, you know what, let's just rest for the rest of the day, as it had been a solid few days of travel. There's something I always wanted to do if I ever went to Istanbul. I had seen videos online of zikr gatherings in the Hagia Sophia, where people get together and recite prayers and chants of God's name and religious phrases. I've done it before and it is a very spiritual experience, and from what I gathered, they did this at the Hagia Sophia after the morning prayers. But those prayers were around 4 in the morning, and this would really be my last chance as we only had one full day left for our holiday. And also, my kid wanted to come. So I stayed awake all night, not trusting myself to go to sleep, keeping myself awake by watching Tales of the Crypt episodes. And then we were on our way, 3 something in the morning. It's very rare to be able to get shots of the Hagia Sophia when it's empty. It's kind of spooky really at this time. Loads of dark corners where you can't fully see. The gathering itself after the morning prayer was fantastic though.
الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له وهو العزيز الحكيم لا إله إلا الله 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 حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا 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 الله الملك الحق المبين محمد رسول الله صادق الوعد الأمين اللهم يا معدن الجود والكرم ويا خالق النور والظلم ويا رب الكعبة والحرم نجنا من كل هم
By the time we got out, the sun had started to rise. We grabbed something to eat from one of the vendors who were setting up shop, and we decided to spend our last day at Eyyup Sultan. On the way, we saw the tomb of Sultan Ahmed V, the Sultan who was put on the throne after Sultan Abdul Hamid II was forced to abdicate. Couldn't get in though. We took the tram as you do, but got off a different stop than usual so we could walk there. And on the way, we took a look at mosques we found here and there, including this one where two kids were having a kickabout. We were deep into authentic Turkish territory now, where people did not speak English. And there was something enthralling about it, being in a completely distant land where you could only communicate through sign language, phone translations, or broken discourse. This is what we ate. And I remember on this day, a clothes seller engaged us in a long conversation, but we pretty much had no idea what he was saying. And then we made it back to the tranquil Eyyup Sultan. We visited the tomb, the mosque, sat around, played with the cats, bought some stuff from the shops and just chilled. It was really nice. A good calm down to a hectic but rewarding week of traveling. You discover so much just walking around. This water supply, for example, it was commissioned by Suleiman the Magnificent. That means this is about 500 years old. Amazing. We saw some cable cars that would have provided some amazing sights, but the queues were too long for this, so we just stayed in Eyyup Sultan well into the night. Finishing off our holiday and preparing ourselves to go back to the Western world with a Western meal. I really like this photo. The new mosque in the foreground, bright and blue, and the Suleymaniyye mosque in the background, majestic and imperial. It's almost like a king and queen. So anyway, that was pretty much that. 8 days in Istanbul. We had a great time and I would highly recommend it. Have you been to this city? If so, let me know what you think of it down in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thank you for watching.